Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to my presentation this morning. It's really cold, so I appreciate that you took time, and I hope you bundled up really well. And thank you so much for the Gardner Center team for inviting me. This is a really pleasure. This is a big pleasure for me to be here this morning, and this is my first time to be in Seattle, and I have been enjoying the city, the museums, and the great food. So I really enjoy being in Seattle. This is great. And I just got to see the Hokusai exhibition that Simon just mentioned, and it is wonderful. So if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend. I heard it's closing very soon. And if you would like to see it again, you might want to come to Kansas City because the exhibition is traveling to Kansas City next in the fall this year. So stay tuned. So at the Nelson-Atkins where I work, I often encounter objects that have like very interesting life stories to offer, and many of them have been mended, restored, or even transformed. And so those objects include like textiles, paintings, sculptures, ceramics, and all kinds of objects. And ceramics used or meant for tea practices are especially intriguing because the mending on their bodies speak to the moments of rupture and recovery. And in my talk today, we will pay special attention to the ceramics that were restored with lacquer. Oh, it worked. Okay. And in my presentation today, I would like us to focus on the time between the 16th century and the 19th century. And so this time period includes the Edo period, which starts in 1615 and ends in 1868. And I just missed the wonderful exhibition, Renegade Edo, and so you are all prepared. Anyways, so from the 16th to the 19th century, when a cherished ceramic was broken, its user was faced with choices to determine the damaged ceramic's future. One path was to have it repaired with urushi, or lacquer, a traditional medium used both as adhesive and as coating. When desired, urushi was dusted with a powdered precious metal, which transformed the refurbishment into an ornamental addition to the ceramic body. Another option was to compensate the loss by introducing a new supplemental element. The examples I am highlighting today were visually transformed through the processes of rupture and recovery. So the visual mending has become a popular style in recent decades, referred to under the umbrella term kintsugi. If you look up kintsugi on the internet, you can find all kinds of kintsugi-inspired designs, from dresses to even cell phone cases. And however, the history of ceramics with visually enhanced mending has not been studied extensively, due partially to the scarce existence of written accounts of individual restoration cases. This challenge, though, directs us to look at the mended ceramics that still survive. And it urges us to posit a multi-dimensional definition of authenticity. So these are some of the ceramics I will highlight today. And they were made for storing or serving green tea. And you might be familiar with the powdered green tea called matcha. And in my presentation today, I will discuss these mended ceramics' cultural context, their stories of rupture and transformation, and why their owners cared for them. And at the end of our time this morning, we will also think about the terminology and the layered meanings that mended ceramics present to us. Sorry. Okay, here you go. So before we dive into the cultural context of tea, I would like to pay attention to the definition of authenticity. So the definition of authenticity ranges widely, but for an object to be perceived as authentic, it needs to be in original physical form, have a historical significance, and have a direct connection to its creator. Its functionality is also an essential factor. And for the ceramics that we're going to look at today, the fourth element, the functionality, is especially relevant because those ceramics were meant for use. So because of these criteria, when a work of art has been heavily retouched or compensated with replacements, the object's legitimacy is reassessed, especially in a museum context. Also, for display purposes at museums, minimal discernible traces of conservation are preferred. However, fascinatingly, the mended ceramics that I will discuss today challenge some of these criteria. They were made for, or selected for, chanoyu, which is a choreographed way of serving and consuming tea. In chanoyu, utensils are treated with special attention. And the restorations done on the ceramics are not only visible, but the repairs have also become ornamental elements or even focal points. Their transformed bodies urge us to reject a binary sense of authenticity and to acknowledge that they represent intriguing afterlives post-production. So let us look at the cultural context of tea, or chanoyu. Chanoyu means hot water for tea, and it is often referred to as tea ceremony or tea gathering in English-speaking regions. As the name suggests, it is a way of preparing and consuming tea. And in Japan, powdered green tea has been consumed since the end of the 12th century. During the 15th century, tea drinking became an elaborate pastime. And from the late 15th century into the 16th century, a new way of tea was cultivated. So in the new style of chanoyu, concepts such as wabi and sabi were incorporated into the practice. Wabi refers to terms such as simplicity, quietude, and understated beauty. And sabi refers to terms such as rustic, withered, and patina. Together, wabi and sabi embrace imperfection, asymmetry, and processes. And I have a wonderful quote by Murata Shuko for you. And Murata Shuko was one of the early tea men. And he said, "The moon is not pleasing unless partly obscured by a cloud." His thought on materiality is echoed in the ways in which mended ceramics are cherished in their lives post-production and post-transformation. Another tea man named Sen no Rikyu also discusses the beauty of imperfect utensils. He said, "There are those who dislike a piece when it is even slightly damaged. Such an attitude shows a complete lack of comprehension. Their thoughts embody how quote-unquote imperfect objects, including mended ceramics, are appreciated in the world of chanoyu." So let's look at what kind of objects or utensils are used in chanoyu. When the host plans a chanoyu gathering, they would select utensils carefully. They also choose objects and plants to decorate the room and what food and confectionery to serve before tea. Preparation of tea and utensils happens in the mizuya, or preparation room, which this print by Mizuno Toshikata depicts. So in this image, the woman on the right is transferring freshly ground green tea into a tea container. She is right here. This woman seems to hold a lacquered green tea container lacquered wooden tea container. And the same preparation would be done with ceramic tea caddies. After tea caddy is ready, it goes into a bag made of high-quality fabric. And an example of that type of bag is seen right here. Some tea caddies have multiple accessory bags, and the host chooses the most appropriate one for the occasion. The other woman here in the blue robe is carefully holding a black tea bowl. She may have taken the bowl out of the box placed near her, right here in front of her knees. So tea utensils, like tea containers and tea bowls, are often stored in individual boxes. And some high-value utensils can have multiple boxes, as we will see later. And those boxes and what's in the boxes are very important part of each ceramic, because some of them do have biography written on the box or a piece of paper in the box. So if you happen to have some of those, I would highly encourage you to keep them with the ceramics. So during a tea gathering, the host serves tea using carefully prepared utensils. And the guests pay attention to the host's graceful choreography. And I saw the wonderful tea house in the museum downtown, and I would like you to kind of imagine being in that space. So the guests so it is a little difficult to see in this image, but the host is this woman in a pale green robe and a purple-ish sash. So she is using a bamboo ladle to scoop hot water from the kettle placed in the hearth, and she would pour hot water into the white tea bowl placed in front of her. And each guest would have individual interactions with the bowl. So they would hold the bowl in their hands, drink tea from it, and admire its posture afterwards. So each individual would have a physical connection for a moment. And they would also watch the host clean the bowl up before taking it back to the preparation room. And after the drinking tea, they might see some other utensils such as tea caddy, tea scoop, or maybe a bag, things like that. And the host and the guest talk about their names, who owned them, and what the backstories are, and things like that. So utensils are not just for consuming tea, but things that are admired and discussed in tea gatherings. And after the gatherings, each utensil is carefully cleaned and put back in their own storage box. There we go. So although tea practitioners use tea utensils with great care, accidents can happen, as we all can relate. And some ceramics we will look at shortly today have naturally softer clay bodies, and they tend to crack or break more easily than others. And when those accidents happened in Japan from the 16th to the 19th century, one way to address the problem was to use an adhesive called urushi, which is tree sap harvested from the urushi tree. And, And so when the owner desired the urushi can be dusted with powdered precious metals such as gold and silver, or when the clay body lost a large chunk, the gap could be filled with a shard from a different ceramic piece. So these mendings are referred to as kintsugi today in a somewhat casual manner. And kintsugi means gold joinery, and it has become a part of popular culture, as I mentioned earlier. However, as I will explain later, the term kintsugi does not seem to have been used during the period we are focusing on today. So I will introduce some other terms and avoid using the term kintsugi in this presentation. So the main adhesive used across the mending I will introduce today is called urushi. Urushi is a tree sap collected from the urushi tree. And from one urushi tree, one can harvest about a half pound of sap. So you can kind of imagine how time consuming it is to harvest and process the tree sap. And so the sap will be processed and used for material for multiple purposes. It is a long-standing medium used in Japan since the early Jomon period as adhesive, binder, surface coating, and decoration. Because urushi is in the family of poison ivy, you must gain an immunity before handling it. Imagine getting a reaction. I was once in a room where urushi was used, and I didn't even touch it, but because urushi was in the air, I got a reaction. So it can be very strong. So in the Edo period, professionals such as nushi and makieshi would have mended damaged ceramics using urushi. They received commissions from ceramics owners and mended them at their workshops. And the restoration process begins by assessing the level of damage and deciding what kind of treatment is needed. And there are different ways to mend them, and there are different type of urushi used throughout the process. And the restoration timelines range widely because each rupture case is unique. But it is safe to say it takes many more steps and a much longer time than using modern synthetic adhesives. The first example of mended ceramic I am introducing here is a beloved Chinese tea caddy made in the 13th century. Chinese objects were treasured in the context of tea, and this tea caddy held a high status and even acquired the poetic name Shozan. The first character here means pine, and the second character is mountain, so its name is Pine Mountain. Here, Shozan sits on a vermilion lacquered tray, indicating its high status. The photograph below shows 4 silk bags that adorned and protected Shozan like clothing. We don't know when it came to Japan, but its biography in the Edo period is fascinating, so let me introduce that. So at the dawn of the Edo period, which is early 17th century, Shozan was in the possession of Matsudaira Masatsuna. He was one of the advisors to Shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu and the head of finance division of the Edo government. Masatsuna passed Shozan to his son Masanobu. Then later, Masanobu's son Masahisa sold Shozan to Naraya Genshi, sometime between 1691 and 1714. Naraya Genshi paid 4,000 ryo. Ryo is the currency then, and 4,000 ryo would have been enough money to feed roughly 4,000 people for a year in the 18th century. So this is a very, very rough calculation. I have to be transparent about that. But it suffices to say that Naraya thought Shozan was worth a fortune. So Genshi's descendants treasured Shozan for the next 150 years. And Shozan's provenance and physical beauty were treasured among tea connoisseurs who recorded their observations in their diaries and other types of accounts. So this beloved Shozan went through a physical transformation in the 19th century. On the 21st day of the 3rd month in 1829, its body shattered into pieces during a tragic fire. According to written accounts, then owner Naraya Genjiro, who is the descendant of the person who purchased this from the Matsudaira family. So Naraya Genjiro collected the shards from the ashes, determined to have it restored. His goal was to reconstruct it to look identical to its original unharmed form. Genjiro Harutanimatsu ya Socho look at the remains. And Socho was a tea utensil dealer and had previously recorded Shozan's bodily traits before the tragic fire, including the height, diameter, the glaze pattern, and weight. Based on Socho's record, a lacquer named Kawabata Konsa reconstructed Shozan's body by joining the shirts and filling in the lost parts with wood. He coated the surface with lacquer to make the restored body look identical to its original form. Kawabata Konsa was a nushi based in Osaka, and this story illustrates Naraya Genjiro's determination to restore Shozan. Genjiro was in Edo, or today's Tokyo, and he needed to send Shozan to Osaka, so he needed to arrange the travel as well. And on a side note, Konsa also reconstructed the storage boxes that were destroyed by the fire. So not only the body of Shozan itself, but also the accessories that embodied its significance needed to be reconstructed. A recent scientific study published by Ito Yoshiaki verified the rebirth story of Shozan. The X-ray scan shows that the body under the lacquered surface is constructed of ceramic, wooden pieces, and thin pieces of lead to replicate its form and weight. The body is constructed of 13 shards, which Naraya Genjiro picked up from the ashes. And these findings lead us to wonder if today's Shozan is authentically original or not. From a scientific perspective, it may not be fully authentic because about 1/2 of its body is a later reconstruction with added new elements. Additionally, the exterior is reconstructed with lacquer, not glaze. However, from a tea connoisseur's viewpoint, its authenticity does not appear to have been a problem because it still retains original parts that contain both its users' memories and its value as a highly appreciated Chinese luxury item. Shozan reclaimed its aura through an quote-unquote invisible restoration, and it continued to appear in records of famous utensils in the 1920s. Naraya Genjiro's dedication to Shozan, as demonstrated through the transformation process, makes its biography all the more captivating. As opposed to the recreation of Shozan, in which the purpose was to reinvent its body as if nothing had happened, the gold and colored lacquer used in other examples make their restorations visible. The little patches along the lip of this karatsu-type bowl, here and here, which is about here. So these patches along the lip blends in with the bowl's body. Karatsu-type ceramics such as this bowl were created in Kyushu by incorporating Korean ceramic designs and techniques. The small brownish red patches have aged with the bowl through repeated use, making the reinforcement inconspicuous while conveying the passage of time. Although the lacquer fillings are added elements, they do not distract from the viewer's attention while looking at the bowl, and if you slide your finger over the patches, you barely feel the material difference. So sensory experience was very important component when restoring these bodies. The mended seam on this gohon type bowl are discreetly embellished with gold. Here is, am I tracing it right? Like about here. So gohon-type ceramics were custom made in Korea for Japanese clients who desired Korean vessels for channel-yu. And repairing technique like this were often referred to as kintsukuroi or kinpun tsukuroi. Kinpun is a gold powder and tsukuroi is mending. And in tea chronicles so those words were used in tea chronicles during the Edo period. The fine golden lines blend with the bowl's pinkish cream crackle glaze. And unlike Nishozan's, this bowl was most likely not a famous object, but the repair was done with care, and it did not change the appearance dramatically or impact the user's tactile experience. The gently glistening golden veins suggest an intention to bring the bowl back to its fully functional state while adding a restrained ornamental effect. The fine golden lines are also found on the 16th century Japanese glazed stoneware tea bowl. This example demonstrates the decorative effects mending can add to a damaged ceramic. Looking at the bowl from above, in this photo on your right, we see two different transformations the bowl went through. One is marked by a fine golden line running across the body, which splits into three, like a stream branching out in three directions. Another damage caused a significant loss of its body along the lip, right here. So to address the issue of loss, the owner had the area filled with lacquer and further decorated with small floral motifs, making the mending an ornamental addition. A makieshi lacquer applied a relief-making technique to create small golden flower motifs. And the negative space of the patch was dusted with silver powder. As it aged, the silver tarnished, so we see a more restrained addition. These two ornamental restorations were done at least two different times, demonstrating the care that the bowl received. The repairs stand out pleasantly as they complement its original body with a color temperature and a composition that resembles the glaze. Although no longer in its original undamaged form, the bowl regained its functionality and acquired a renewed body, remarking the owner's affection towards the bowl. The owner of this Korean bowl, named Shigure, also seemed to like the idea of adding a decorative element when recovering its damaged body back to functional state. Shigure means sudden shower. Like the seto or mino bowl that we just looked at earlier, Shigure went through some moments of rupture, and it was mended each time. And according to the inscription on its box, it was owned by a tea practitioner, and Matsudaira Yasumitsu named the bowl in 1804 because that bowl suited his taste. The inscription does not tell us why it was named Shigure, but I wonder if the grayish body of the Shigure, which accumulated in additional colors through repeated use, might have evoked some poetic thoughts in Yasumitsu's mind. Matsudaira Yasumitsu, who is also known as Yanagisawa Gyozan, was a respected tea master in the early 19th century. We do not know if Shigure was already in its transformed body when Yasumitsu had tea with it, but I sort of doubt it was already transformed. But similar to Shozan, the Chinese tea container we looked at earlier, Shigure had 2 layers of storage boxes in a bag, according to the inscription. However, only the outer box survived. The use of lacquer and gold to address ceramics defects can create a striking focal point, and Seppo, or Snowy Peak by Honami Koetsu, is the best example of that. Honami Koetsu was a multi-talented artist and created many works of art decorated with lacquer. And the Seattle Art Museum have wonderful works by Koetsu, and this writing box is one of them that Koetsu created in the early 17th century. The superb design shows his sensibility in embracing an asymmetrical and dynamic composition. Also, the execution of the cranes and reeds reveal his familiarity with urushi, which he used for filling the cavity of the bowl. So Honami Koetsu was deeply involved in the arts and the culture of Kyoto, in which Chanoyu held a central place. Tradition tells that the bowl came out of the kiln with severe cracks, and Koetsu filled the gap with lacquer and dusted with gold. On the pinkish-red round body of the seppo, the white glaze resembles the snowy mountain peaks. Breaking the quiet mountainscape are dynamic and bold golden fillings that cut through the scenery like sudden lightning, or perhaps the rushing water of waterfalls. Because the bowl was born with severe breaks, we may not call Koetsu's act a repair, but an artistic choice. It also suggests that lacquer and precious metal powder can be used as an artistic technique to transform imperfections into design elements. Because this golden lacquer fill was added by the creator himself, this is without question an authentic part of Seppo's body. Seppo was passed down to notable elite figures and is now an important cultural property of Japan, celebrated for its extraordinary appearance. The dramatic landscape we see on the body of Seppo echoes a concept that tea connoisseurs appreciated in the Edo period. In tea diaries, tea connoisseurs recorded their appreciation towards the landscape they saw on ceramic bodies. The way glaze runs on the body, for example, was a favored focal point. This raku-type bowl by Ryonyu in the collection of the Seattle Asian Art Museum is a wonderful example that demonstrates the effect that quote-unquote accidental landscape glaze can create on a ceramic body. Ryonyu glazed the top and the bottom of the bowl, but left the middle of the body unglazed. The result resembles the conical shape of Mount Fuji. The next bowl, called Yobitsugi, demonstrated a fascinating bidirectional relationship between the original ceramic body and its added elements. This bowl was made in Japan in the 16th century, and Yobitsugi refers to a restoration technique that uses a supplemental component to compensate the loss. This Yobitsugi bowl was in the possession of Oda Uraku, one of the celebrated tea masters of his time. When this bowl lost a significant amount of its body from its lip toward the middle, like here, so when the accident happened, Uraku took advantage of that moment of fracture, filling the loss with 2 shards from Chinese blue and white porcelain. We do not know if the shards were selected from Uraku's collection, but the union of the Seto ceramic and the Chinese porcelain shards, accentuated by this reversed A-shaped black lacquer fill, demonstrates Uraku's sophisticated and distinct taste. The added elements may not be original to the body, but the transformed body is authentic, as this Yobitsugi bowl is best known for its transformed appearance with the new body parts, as its name tells. So the ceramics we looked at so far were all mended with urushi, or the lacquer tree sap, as we looked at earlier. And I didn't introduce this earlier to avoid confusion, but there was also a repairing method using staples from the 16th to the 19th century. And in the 1790s, ceramics users gained more choice in mending methods as a new restoration technique called yakitsugi developed. Yaki means to fire, and tsugi is to mend. And Kitagawa Morisada's publication titled Morisada Manko gives us an interesting insight into what yakitsugi was and the distinction between everyday porcelain and ceramics for Chanoyu. In the section titled Setomono Yakitsugi, he describes Seto is a site in Owari, and their primary industry is ceramics or porcelain. Therefore, everyday ceramics are called setomono or seto things. The places that sell seto ceramics are called setomono shops. In the past, damaged ceramics were repaired with urushi. During the Kansei era, people began using shiratamako to perform yakitsugi mending. Even today, people do not want to refire the ceramics of high value and those for Chanoyu. So they are mended with urushi. One could dust gold powder. Everyday ceramics are repaired with yakitsugi technique. Morisada also describes that the mending, which professionals called yakitsugi-shi, restored everyday ceramics in metropolitan cities such as Edo, Osaka, and Kyoto. Yakitsugi-shi is also illustrated in this book called Ryakuga Shokunin Zukushi. And the publisher's decision to include this occupation in the book suggests that it was a well-known business. So these yakitsugi-shi, they use a material called shiratama, like white and ball, in which shiratama is composed of glass and lead. They put together broken pieces using shiratama and fired them at high temperature. And this image here is an example of porcelain repaired with yakitsugi technique. So here we can see the traces of rupture and the mending, but it is not as visually pleasing or captivating. And as Morisada mentioned, it was a quicker and a more economical method for everyday porcelain, which were more frequently used and places. His statement also places lacquer as the mending mode, deemed more appropriate for objects with higher significance, such as those for Chanoyu. Although seeing tea ceramics as art object is a modern concept, the previous owner's decisions to repair them with artistic cognizance is demonstrated through the restoration. Unfortunately, not all the mended ceramics have recorded biography, as I mentioned earlier. And although we may not have the full stories of the moments when they were damaged or their recovery process, the attention they received demonstrated their status as objects of notable value, worthy of both financial and time investments. So far, we have covered different terms such as kintsukuroi and yobitsugi. So tsugi and tsukuroi both mean to join and to mend. And as I mentioned earlier, an umbrella term called kintsugi is often used today, but it does not appear in diaries and other accounts related to Chanoyu between the 16th and 19th centuries. Instead, tea connoisseurs use terms such as tsugi, tsukuroi, urushi tsugi, and kintsukuroi or kinpun tsukuroi. And the word tsukuroi further indicates that visual quality was an important factor in mending. Tsukuroi appears in the early 14th century literary work titled Tsurezure-gusa, in which Yoshida Kenko writes, "Mirror in hand, touches up her makeup." As seen here, the word refers to both mending and visual improvement. Thinking about the meaning of these terms alongside the yakitsugi method we looked at earlier, mending tea ceramic was a more artistic process rather than simply restoring its physical functionality. So ceramics mended with urushi were used often in chanoyu practice. Therefore, I think it is useful to also touch on how damaged or repaired ceramics were viewed in the context of tea. So kind of circling back to the beginning of this talk. So although accounts directly referring to mended objects are scarce, some notes indicate that the tea masters need sympathetic thoughts on objects that went through the process of damage and recovery. According to Sen no Soshitsu, two tastemakers and early practitioners of chanoyu, Noami and Murata Shuko, used a broken urn as a vase for an old branch and admired them in the late 15th century. Such embracement of old, withered objects cultivates sympathy towards imperfections in life. The aristocrat and tea practitioner Konoe Iehiro wrote a note about a mended bamboo flower container in his diary Kaiki. Iehiro writes, "The bamboo flower container, twisted and mended with black lacquer dusted with gold powder. Excellent landscape." His accounts give us the idea that the mending method was used beyond ceramics, and that mending was interpreted as landscape in the context of aristocratic taste in the late 17th and early 18th centuries. Their statements, among others, indicate that the visible mending and transformation of damaged objects were not considered flaws, but embraced. Damaged ceramics invoke a sense of compassion towards what might be perceived as defects. The empathy and nostalgia towards the lived experience of damaged utensils are distilled during the last 2 weeks of October, a time which tea practitioners called nagori and yatsure, before opening a new jar of tea in November. According to Christy Bartlett and Tsutsui Hiroichi, the host and guests appreciate the lives of mended ceramics and their bodies while they share the last of the year's tea. So in the presentation today, we looked at examples of mended ceramics. They were chosen or made for chanoyu, and as objects to be used, their bodies were mended when damaged. Some were reconstructed to look as if nothing had happened, while others gained additional ornamental elements through the recovery process. Their reinvented bodies with decorative additions, along with the poetic names they acquired, are proof that they were considered ceramics worthy of premium mending and care. The chapters of their lives, ranging from impairment to revival, are mended onto their bodies, and they urge us to look at the intriguing post-production afterlives they endured and to posit a multi-dimensional definition of authenticity. They are authentic objects that survive to the present with the aid of mending, retaining some portions of their original bodies, if not all. Although the vessels discussed today may no longer serve or store tea because they are in museum collections, their original roles as valuable utensils carry on. Thank you very much. Are we doing Q&A? Okay. If you have any questions or comments.
We've got one right here.
Hello, thank you. Can you talk a little bit about the gold powder and the lacquer and how that was actually done?
Sure. So lacquer, I kind of use lacquer or urushi as kind of overarching term, but after that lacquer is processed, it has like a different types within the family of lacquer, and different type of the, so hold on, let me step back. So the lacquer of the different refinement is used at different stages of the mending. So the earlier stage would have some supplemental materials, such as like clay or like metal powder or ground stone. And so they were mixed to support lacquer as adhesive. And so when a bowl cracked or like broke into two pieces, the first step is to refine the polish the breakage, and so smooth out and put lacquer with some like supplemental elements like the clay, and then so that will be the body of mending. But then later on, more refined, like more transparent lacquer will be applied, and then polished. But then so that process kind of repeats until the gap is filled. And then in the last part of the mending, more refined and more transparent lacquer is applied, and before the lacquer dries, the gold powder is sprinkled on. Yeah, and then as we looked at earlier in that one on the left, top left, that one is more complicated because it has like a decoration on top of the gold powdered lacquer. And the gold powder also is a interesting material because we call it gold powder, but there are different refinement level within the gold powder. And you can use like a more refined one for really, really smooth surface or smooth texture. But you can also choose to have a little more like coarse gold powder to make certain texture looking called a pear skin. So that's another choice that mender can make.
How did they keep the broken pieces when they refired them together in the kiln? I would think you'd put something in between the pieces, put in the kiln, I would think they would just tend to fall apart.
Are you talking about yakitsugi or this gold lacquer?
The newer.
The newer one. So that's something that I would love to know more. It's still like kind of in the research process in my part. So the lead and the glass, they need to be fired at really high temperature, right? So I think my understanding at this moment is that it was only available for porcelain, because porcelain needs like really high fire, high temperature fire, and stoneware cannot really survive that kind of high temperature. So I think there was like a kind of physical or like scientific reasons that yakitsugi was not for stoneware. Yeah. And so that's a really good question, and I would love to know more eventually. Yeah, thank you.
I'm thinking I might have to go break a few bowls and repair them to enhance their beauty. Is there any history of any intentional breakage, or these were all accidental occurrences that were then mended?
Thank you for the question. So that's something that I have been thinking and wondering. And as I kind of touched on earlier, there are not many like really reliable written accounts of like why people mended. And there is one tea bowl called Jumonji, which means cross. And there's in the 16th century tea men called I'm blinking his name. But there is a tea master, Oribe, Furuta Oribe. And so he was a big figure in the tea world. And he liked to do something different. And so there is that bowl, jumonji or cross, has a big mending, like really visible mending. And the tradition says Oribe trim the body slightly to make it fit his taste. And so that's one example. Maybe people actually like broke them intentionally to make something new. But that's sort of somewhat anecdotal story. And some other stories also are very interesting, but I don't know if they were stories that kind of developed later. So those are the things I would love to know more too. Thank you.